What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Cook Kitchen. I am the Cook Chef, and today we are cooking up a brand new video discussing what we think is the worst, the absolute worst meta deck. The deck that is considered to be playable in the meta, and people continue to play it, but it is clearly just not good. And that deck is Scolipede Weezin. So this is the Scolipede Weezin deck, and it's the Weezin Scolipede deck from standard format. So we are going to look at the no EX version of this that is played in the no EX format, but we are going to start by looking at the standard format version of this deck. And obviously it's the standard format version because we are playing the Tauros, which is meant to directly counter EX Pokemon. Over time, the data has come in on this deck, and it still has around a 3% meta share, which is super duper shocking because this deck is not good anymore. It came out of the gate very hot, very similar to how when Golem came out, it won a big tournament and then completely dropped off. In fact, this deck did win a tournament. It has one tournament win, and it won on December 18th, which is right after the release of Mythical Island. So it came into the format super strong right off the genetic Apex format, which was a ton of Mewtwo. Nobody else figured out all the new decks yet that had come out. Nobody really had a handle on Executor Celebi yet. No one figured out Gyarados. In fact, this deck, and what made it good, was the fact that it could counter Mewtwo, and in that tournament it faced like 5 Mewtwo decks, and so that helped it a ton to win that tournament. And also note that the tournament it won, it did not face a single EX Pokemon that had more than 160 HP, which is the benchmark highest amount of damage that you are able to really one-shot a Pokemon or take a Pokemon out at that HP, because you get 30 damage from your Weezin plus the 10 from poison, and then you get in with your Scolipede and you do 120, which is a total of 160 HP. So it is super duper hard for this deck to hit that benchmark anymore, and it's just too hard to knock out things like Gyarados and Charizard. Any deck with 180 HP, this deck is going to do very poorly against. And of course, the meta share for Mewtwo has dropped. At one point, it was like as high as 26%. It has dropped down to 18%. It's still the highest meta share, but when the meta share drops in the deck you are very strong against, you are less likely going to see it as much as you used to. So this deck has an abysmal 46% win rate, and it's just not doing as good as it should be. And honestly, it's not even doing as good as Arbok and Weezin were doing in the format in Genetic Apex before Mythical Island came out. So this deck, just in my opinion, is not good. People still think it's good, and it's absolutely not. It has a terrible win rate, way too low for the high meta share of 3%. That one tournament win was very early on before all these new decks came out and the meta was actually figured out, and now it's just doing absolutely nothing. There's just better options to try and counter the meta in better ways with better decks and better Pokemon that have stronger attacks. There are way better tech box decks now that have Tauros and Mew and can be used in those other decks way better than this deck, such as Greninja, Farfetch, or even there's even Executor EX decks that play Mew. There's the There's even just the standard tech box decks with Aerodactyl, Marshadow, and Hitmonlee to be able to do enough damage to really take your opponent out in those kind of single prize decks that we've been looking at recently on the channel. So this deck just is not good. And in fact, not only is it not good in standard, but it's even worse in no EX format, which is kind of surprising. You would think that it would be a little better because you're hitting for the same amount of damage as you would in an EX format. And the no EX Pokemon have lower HP. You would think that it would be doing better, but to be honest, it's not, and we'll get into all those reasons right now. So these are the statistics from the no EX format for the Scolipede Weezing deck. It has an even higher meta share than it does in standard format with 7%, so a 4% higher meta share, but has an even lower win rate with 39% win rate, lower than 40%. That is absolutely horrendous. I cannot believe it is that low. It's actually 38.92% to be precise. So not only does it have a higher meta share, so it's actually more popular in the no EX, but it's actually worse in the no EX format with a tremendously low win rate of 39%. So the deck is pretty similar to the previous deck we looked at from the standard EX format. Except, of course, we're not playing the Tauros. Instead, we are actually playing something like a Salandit. A lot of the versions don't play Salandit. However, if I ever did play this deck, I would play the Salandit. I think it is very beneficial in this deck. But it's just everyone continues to play this deck in tournaments, and I do not understand it. I'm not sold at all on this deck. I was at the beginning. I was very high on it when it was doing very good at the very, very beginning of Mythical Island format, but no longer. So I'm not sure why people continue to play this, and I have a theory, and I think it has to do with one, people probably just like the deck, and that's totally fine. I actually like the deck. I have played the deck before, but it's just not good for tournament play. But it honestly probably does very well on ladder. These decks are very synergistic. They do counter a lot of stuff and can easily beat quite a bit of decks, especially in the hands of pretty good players or in the hands of people that aren't playing a very condensed meta, something like ladder, like the current ladder we have on Pokemon Pocket, where it's just for fun. You go on, there's no ranking system. You go in, you have fun with your decks, and that's totally fine. And I don't want to take anything away from those players. I play decks like that all the time. I'm just here to report the data as I see it. And in a meta game, this deck is not good no matter which format you're playing it in. And again, this is for sure good on ladder. We see it do well on ladder all the time. I've done well with it. I've done terrible against it. I've done good against it and as well. And decks like Arbok Weezing. I've made 2 different videos on Arbok Weezing, which I still think is better than this deck. But honestly, if I'm being honest, like the data shows that this deck actually is better than the Arbok version. But I like the Arbok version better, and it just goes to show what I've been trying to say, that this deck on ladder is probably really good, because every time I go to the ladder with Arbok Weezing, this Arbok Weezing does tremendously well for me. I always have a very positive win rate with it, and so again, in a standard for fun format like ladder, this deck is probably good, and I'm sure I'm going to see a ton of people say this in the video, in the comments, that, this deck is good. I don't care what the data says. I play it. I win a ton of wins with it, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure it's on ladder. But in tournament play, the meta report and the data from Play Limitless TCG shows this deck is not worth playing. Now again, As a person who prides himself on not playing meta decks, I don't like to play meta decks. I do like to report on them and understand where the meta is so that I have a better understanding of the game. I like to continue to learn every day about card games and just games and strategy in general, but I do pride myself on trying to play non-meta decks that are good and make them good. I'm also like, the whole point of Card Kitchen and being a cook and a chef is so that you can create interesting cooks that are good, viable, fun, and always trying to find that new meta deck. I want to be that guy who finds the new deck that comes out in the meta and surprises everybody, and I constantly try to do it. I don't think I'm going to do it at this point in the current format that we have, but that's what I'm always trying to do, trying to figure out something that someone else hasn't figured out yet. But what I think we have figured out is this deck in a metagame just isn't viable. There's no reason to be playing it. The players playing this in tournament, this is what I would suggest. Even if it's a very fun deck, even if you love it, even if you believe so hard in it, what I suggest is take all that passion, all that drive that you have for playing this deck and put it into an off-meta cook. Something we've never seen, something that people were unexpected, because that is where you win tournaments with off-meta cooks. That's how this deck won at the beginning of Mythical Island. Nobody saw it. Nobody expected the type of power it would have in that current meta against a ton of Mewtwo. Things like 25% meta share of a Mewtwo in Psychic decks. And same thing happened with the Golem. No one knew what they were getting into when they were facing the Golem, so no one knew how to beat it or work around it, and that was one of the huge reasons why Golem did so well when it first came out. So take that mindset that you have in playing this deck and put it into an off-meta cook that no one has seen, no one can tell, so that when I do my next top 10 list and someone else does a meta report in the content sphere of Pokemon Pocket, they can see that deck pop up in the tops of tournaments and be like, oh my god, look at this off-meta cook that I just found that got 5th, 6th, 7th, 11th, first place in a tournament. This off-meta cook, blah, 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 blah. That's what I would like to see. But, of course, if this is your deck, this is your deck. Everyone has it. Continue to enjoy it. Continue to enjoy it on ladder. I don't want to take anything away from anybody. I'm sure there's people who love this deck. And again, I still think on ladder, this is a good deck. It's just not great. I think it for the meta in tournaments, it is completely overrated, and I'm not sure I understand why people continue to play it and why it has such a popular meta share in the meta game. But anyways, with that being said, I'm done with this rant. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know if you agree or disagree, or if you want to yell at me and let me know how off my opinion is and not to make fun of your or put down your favorite deck. Like, subscribe, and share if you're not too upset with all the things I've said about this deck. And as always, keep cooking.